Hey guys, in this video, I'm going to walk you through how to add pieces H and I to your center unit to complete the center unit so we can begin working towards completing our blocks at class next week. So what we want to do is first of all, identify the pieces. So this rectangle is going to be, your smaller rectangle is piece H, your longer rectangle is piece I. We're going to begin with piece H. We want to make sure that we are placing it on the side that has the seam. So if you notice on this unit, this side has a seam, this side does not. And if I bring that up closer, you may be able to see a little bit better, but always placing piece H on the seam side. So what we're gonna do is place these right side together, just like this. Make sure your edges here, your raw edges are aligned, and make sure that it's even with the top and the bottom of your block, or should be pretty close to being even there. I'm just gonna rotate this for pinning. And you can go ahead and just place a few pins to hold it together. As you're pinning, make sure your edges stay even. Remember, we're going to sew along this side at our 1/4 inch seam allowance. If you haven't done so already, make sure that you test your machine to find your true 1/4 inch or your true scant 1/4 inch. I also added a pin here where my seams are located. I don't want that seam to flip over or get twisted as I'm sewing. So I'm just gonna anchor that with a straight pin there. And now we're gonna move over to the machine. Okay, so now we're at the machine. We're simply gonna line up with our 1/4 inch seam and go ahead and attach this to our unit. Make sure as you sew, you're staying in line with your tape or your sewing guide. And of course you can chain piece this to make this process faster. And that's what I would do if I were you. I would just go ahead and do all of your H pieces, attaching those to your center unit. Okay, now we're at the iron. We're going to press to set in our stitches. Remember, that's simply just taking your iron, pressing the seam. And then we're going to open this and press our seams open. That does take a little bit of extra time, but it is worth it. You'll really be glad you took that time when we start putting our quilt top together. So again, you can do this same step, you know, assembly style, to where you are ironing all of your H seams open, and that will make the process faster. I don't have any starch here today. I took all of it to the studio and forgot to bring a bottle home to use here. So anyway, you would want to be starching, you know, you would want to add starch to this, but since I don't have any, I'm just going to make do. Okay, here we are back at our cutting mat. At this point, we have attached piece H, we've pressed open, and now we're ready to attach piece I. I is going to go along the top side here. See how now we have a seam for that's going to intersect with piece I. So if you notice, that's how, you know, the pattern that we are kind of creating here is where each rectangle does join with a seamed side. I hope that makes sense on the video. But what I'm trying to help you avoid is placing your rectangles on a side without a seam and making that mistake. So be aware of that as you're positioning your rectangles for pinning. So we're gonna go ahead and put this one right sides together and begin pinning to hold this in place. I like to, again, pin the seam where you've pressed open, this underside, making sure you don't get that seam twisted as you're sewing. And, you know, as a beginner, the more pins, the better, but once you get some experience, you'll be able to sew with less pins. At least at this point in the game, you would be able to sew with less pins. As your blocks get larger, of course, you know, as we continue to build and put pieces together, you'll want to use more pins. But okay, so we have this piece I attached with pins. Now we're ready to go to our machine and go ahead and sew 1/4 inch seam. All right, we're ready to sew our 1/4 inch seam. We're starting here. We're going to sew all the way down. Again, you can definitely save time by chain piecing. My suggestion to you would be to go ahead and make one of the center blocks, you know, completely by attaching H and I. Go ahead and do that start to finish, just so you know where you're going. And then after you do one, then set yourself up assembly line style, or, you know, chain piecing. I don't know, they don't really have a thing called chain ironing, but you know what I'm saying. Like, do the same step through all of your units and then come back to the next step and continue that throughout all of the units. You'll be much less likely to make a mistake that way. You know, it's not as much to remember. So now we're going to iron. We've got this attached. We simply need to go iron this, and then we'll be ready for cutting. Okay, we're back at the iron. We're going to set in our seam, set in our stitches, and then open our seam. Again, starch helps so much with this. And I don't like to iron without starch, but for today I'll make do, I guess. Once you iron it open, I do like to flip it. You just have to be careful when you flip it to press that you don't accidentally, you know, mess up what you just did. You don't want to twist your seams and iron those in place twisted. I like to just kind of move around my block like this, just to get the whole thing pressed out very flat. Okay, so now we're ready to go back to our cutting mat, and we're going to begin trimming our square, or trimming our unit down. So here we are back at our cutting mat. We're ready to square up our unit. We want to trim off of our rectangle side first, so we're going to begin trimming there. Our measurement, remember, is 1 3/4. It's the same that we trimmed here on our previous rectangles, and we're going to measure from our seam out 1 3/4 inches, and then trim any of the extra or the excess. So what I'm doing is finding that 1 3/4 inch line on my ruler. I'm laying that directly on top of the seam, so I can see through my ruler. And in fact, my 1 3/4 inch line is directly on top of that seam. I'm just gonna turn this a little bit. That's the beauty of these mats, the rotating mats. And trim that off. Okay, now we're going to rotate our square. We're ready to trim this rectangle. And again, we're measuring from this seam out 1 3/4 inch. So I'm taking my ruler, finding my 1 3/4 inch, laying it on the seam, finding that seam underneath. We're here, 1 3/4, and we're ready to trim this side. Okay, so now we have our rectangle corner, our rectangle sides square, and we're ready to square up this corner, which means we're going to be trimming away on these two sides. This would be step 15, I believe, the very last step in your workbook. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and lay that on my mat. And I'm going to find on my ruler my 7.5 inch line, because we're taking this block, it needs to finish at 7.5 inches. So I'm going to lay my 7.5 inch, that's here. If you're wondering, I'm using a 10.5 inch square. You could use I have a 7.5 right here, so you could simply just use this one. It's to size. So we could place that here and cut around it. So I'm going to place my 7.5 inch measurement here, markings on the corner. I'm also looking across my ruler here, making sure the edge of my unit is in line with 7.5. I'm going to look on this side again, making sure that this side of my block is at 7.5. You should be pretty close. And what we're going to do, you can see we have a lot more to trim off this time than we did on our previous units. So that's nice. That's been nice to kind of have a little extra there. But we're trimming on this side. And then I'm simply going to rotate this mat so I can trim on this side. I haven't moved my ruler at all. I just rotated my mat. This is the OmniGrid mat. It's a rotating circle, works wonderfully for this step, also helps to save a lot of time. However, it can be a pricey investment, so I think they run about $35 to $40 on Amazon. I'm not sure if Joann's ever puts these on sale. I know most of the time OmniGrid does not go on sale, or you're not able to use your coupons at least. But it is a great investment. So there we have it. We have our 7.5 inch center unit completed. And your homework for this week is simply to finish as many of these as you're able to do. This week, as you're working through your homework, feel free to ask questions on our group page. If you have progress pictures, it's just kind of fun to throw those up there. It gives, others who are working some inspiration to see the progress that you're making. So feel free to kind of share in. I want that to be as social as you guys want. But if you have any questions, just let me know. This should be somewhat easy because it's really just a repetition or continuation of what we did last week. So hopefully at this point you're starting to relax a little bit and beginning to enjoy quilting. So we'll see what we can get done, and I will see you guys Friday.